Thank you all so much for listening to me today. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. My name is Fraser Harrison. I am a software engineer by trade. So my bachelor's, my master's is both in software engineering. I am a programmer. My doctorate's a little bit over, still in programming, but it's specifically on training and how we do simulation-based training. So that's my background. Specifically with my programming, however, it's always been AI focused. Way back when I did my undergraduate many years ago, it was around genetic algorithms, how to write code that can learn based on evolution. When it came to my master's, it was looking at CNNs, neural networks, AI code that's programming that's based on our understanding of how the brain works. So I've always been interested in AI and what it means. I actually then I worked in various different places and different careers within IT and computer science. So if you've got any questions about programming, I'm happy to answer as we go through. I worked in the oil and gas industry as a software engineer. I was a consultant doing cloud movements. I came over, I was working for the British Embassy here in Vietnam for about 5 years, looking after their IT as well as their cybersecurity. And I've now been teaching at university for about 5 years. So I've got quite a wide range and background, mainly programming, always been a little focus on AI, but I've done a bit of everything as we go through. Just to pass on another little story, similar to what Akram's just shared. I've got one of my modules at the moment that's really interesting. I teach a module for our computer games design and programming degree, and it's called AI scripting for games. How to make the enemies in games so they act like players. How to write little bits of code so that we can create NPCs and characters that feel human. And what we've done this year, which is really fun, is we've told all our students they should be using AI to complete this module. It's actually a case where we're encouraging them to use ChatGPT, Copilot, Cursor, any tool available for them to produce the best NPCs and characters that they can. Because one of the things that's going to come across and that changes really is that we're really interested in encouraging students to see what they can build and to build the best of their potentials and not to limit themselves by saying, I'm not going to use the tools available to me. It's the same as if you go to the real world, you've always got a calculator on you. We're not expecting you to do mental arithmetic for everything, so why would we limit our students not to use AI as well? So it's a really interesting concept, and we're beginning to see this views of what AI in education means and how it changes. Because we've got a lot of pushback from it, and then also a lot of support from various different people. So no, it's really interesting. I'll let you know how it gets on when we finish the module, but we're only week 9 of week 12, so I've got another 3 weeks before it submits.
Perfect. Just to add as well, another reason why I'm part of this panel here today is because as an organisation and as a school, I'm part of the working group around AI, myself and a few other teachers. So we're looking into ways in which we can potentially harness that as a tool, as well as potentially the risks as well. And we've come up with a policy, a draft policy that we are sharing widely across the school about when should you do it, what's good practice, but equally what could be quite harmful. So that's another thing that I think would be really useful to share in due course, but that's also another angle in which I might ask Fraser later down the line of maybe reviewing that or helping us to review that, or maybe specifically, even without a template, what would you look for, what would you recommend adding to something like that to be shared with our students or parents or teachers. So that would be really, really useful. At this moment in time, does anyone have any questions? You don't have to do it right now, but by all means, we are encouraging you guys to ask questions about AI and careers, potentially a blend of the two. Any questions at the moment? And naturally, as a teacher, I am going to look to some of my students that I teach, and I might be cold calling at some point. Okay, none for now. Okay.
Let me talk a little bit about what AI is at the moment, because we're actually reaching a really interesting point in the development of artificial intelligence. Because I come from a computer science background, very much a science, what we call a positivist view. We measure facts and we measure figures. We count things, we evaluate them, and we measure. Artificial intelligence is a philosophical question. What do we mean by intelligence? What actually is thinking? We've got some really cool tools that we've seen now. We're talking about you taking a picture and it solving maths questions. But there's a philosophical question here we need to ask first of all about, is it actually thinking? Does it understand the maths? Or is it just manipulating numbers? What is the difference between knowledge and the difference between understanding and intelligence, and what is just doing things? So we're reaching this interesting point in computer science where in order to answer this very simple 1 + 1 = 2 question, can we do this? We need to ask a philosophical question about what is thinking. And a lot of computer scientists are struggling and scratching their heads. There's no definitive answer at the moment. And there's lots of thought questions and philosophical questions about what is knowledge and what's understanding. To be honest, at this point, I often spend my time looking to somebody like Sasha, whose background is in psychology, because she understands it a lot more than a lot of my colleagues do, because we've been considering it from a mathematical perspective, from a first principles idea. So I'm actually going to throw this back at you, Akram. I'm going to ask you a very interesting question. Would you say that a student that can do the maths, let's say working out the circumference of a circle, do they know maths if they can follow the equation? Or do they just manipulate symbols?
Sure. I think on one level, it demonstrates fluency, and in a certain context, it's enough to get them the marks, let's say, in an assessment. But I myself would say that in terms of maths and mastery, I think it needs to go beyond just regurgitating or plugging into a formula. So in that particular context, you mentioned circumference. What is pi? How can you represent that as a model or as a diagram? How can you apply it to word problems? And so there's various different aspects to that. More holistically, that would essentially form a very good mathematician as opposed to on a more basic level. So that's how I would describe it.
So I would most likely agree with you. How do you feel it ties in with regards to the general perspective when it comes to applying for a university, getting into a job? Would you say that you would, if you were hiring somebody to do a job and they were able to follow the instructions, is that somebody you want to hire? This is the question.
As a teacher?
As a teacher.
Yeah, sure. I think the philosophy in our particular department is about mastery, so I am certainly encouraging the wider holistic approach. But I think there is a time and a need for keeping things simple, and I think that's where you're always trying to find a balance between making maths interesting and not just about the mechanical process, but it's also balancing, let's say, cognitive load. Sometimes there's certain sets or certain prerequisite knowledge where perhaps explaining too much might confuse or deter students. So sometimes having that progressiveness towards a maths lesson or towards a certain skill can be really helpful as well.
And this is wonderful, because I think this actually ties in very much to what we're going to see. This is one of the changes we're seeing in employment at the moment. Industries suddenly do not need hundreds of people to do basic boilerplate boring jobs. The stuff that used to take 20 people to write example contracts or fill out content or move data from one box to another is being automated. But what it needs is people that fundamentally understand the point. Why are we doing this? What is the purpose behind these goals? And it's a real paradigm shift. It's a real complete change around about what we're looking for when it comes to junior employees. It used to be when you first started a job, you would be put on simple tasks as you learnt to get your feet. As you understood the business and the context around you, you had to do the stuff that nobody else wanted to do. But now, companies are turning around and saying, well, why are we paying somebody to do that when I can ask AI and it's going to give me something good enough? We suddenly need architects, designers and creative people to come up with the decisions and the objectives, not when it comes to the individual tasks and not to just follow and regurgitate information and follow processes. Because the processes, we've found ways of coming through automation and doing some of this. And that's not just large language models like ChatGPT, this is also just processes like neural networks, like generative algorithms, all of these processes. There was a big fad about 3 years ago, robotic process automation. The idea of taking these very simple processes and turning them into simple steps that could be automated. We're seeing a real change in employment, and unfortunately I don't have a final answer about what the new workplace is going to look like, because nobody knows yet. Every industry we've seen is having these changes and is still learning about, well, what does it mean for me? Because what's happening now might also change in the future. It might turn out that companies say, well, actually, we need somebody on the ground watching this. We need to be having oversight over everything. There's been some absolute horror stories of AI gone wrong, but everybody's jumping at it because it's the next big thing, which is lovely for me as an AI specialist, but it's also very scary. Yeah, go.
Brilliant. I was just going to say then, given the dangers and the constant evolving landscape, would you recommend students to do anything in particular at this point, or just stick with almost like the traditional approaches? Or, I mean, Sasha, feel free to either answer this now or perhaps later as well. Do you think students should factor in AI in any way in terms of their IB choices, let's say?
So I'm afraid I can't speak specifically for IB choices, but I think there needs to be a real consideration about what the point of learning is. And you need to consider about what your goals and objectives are actually to be. Qualifications are essential. Qualifications are what gets you in the door. But the problem is, it's your actual understanding, it's your ability to take that information and use it to generalize new information, to apply it to new situations that makes you able to excel. Able to get the next steps is by learning something by doing point A and then applying it to point B. So looking at this sort of problem-solving approach, we have a concept in computer science called computational thinking. It's the idea of taking a big problem, splitting it down into smaller sub-problems that can be easily solved, and then building it back up. Looking for patterns, looking for algorithms, and tying it in. Unless you can look at a big scenario and identify the steps to reach a solution, you're going to really struggle. So this whole process of what it means to learn and what you're trying to achieve and problem solving is probably my number one goal for success. But that also doesn't tie in the fact you still need your qualifications to get your foot in the door and to end up wherever you want to be. Qualifications are your evidence that you know what you're talking about. So it's essential that you are focusing on what that is.
And in a similar way, when we are solving problems in maths, whether it's an exam paper or something else, often we would encourage students to break down problems and apply problem-solving techniques or heuristics. So, if I gave you a certain scenario, let's say, a student's working through a problem and then they get stuck at a certain point. One option is, of course, just to take a picture of it, put it into AI, and let that come up with an answer, possibly even the steps. But from a student perspective and a teacher perspective, how could we make that process more powerful, more impactful in terms of problem solving and longer term memory, rather than just regurgitating something they've just seen on a screen?
Yeah, that sounds very good. Shall we ask what AI has to think about this exact question? Let's see if somebody else has got an opinion. Bring it across. Give me a second. So I'm just running this off ChatGPT through advanced voice mode. So ChatGPT is a large language model. What that means is it's trained on a huge data set. It's got about 16 billion, I think was the latest one. 16 billion different sets of values and information is being fed into it, and then it predicts the most likely next word to say after what's been going forward. Now, large language models do not understand anything. This is a really important point. They have no context behind it, but because they've seen 16 billion other examples, they've probably seen something similar, so they can guess what it is. and it can build a composite. It takes from all these different elements, brings them together, and then chooses the next one. So it's what it really is it shows you just how much a billion is. That's how much, if you ask it, it's going to know pretty much everything you want to ask, and that's purely based on sampling everything else. So yeah, let's give it a shot. I'm just going to click run. It should be piped through the speaker system.
Hello, how's it going?
Hi GPT. We're currently having a discussion about the influence and impact of AI on education. We've got a question for you. What do you think the impact of AI is and what students should be studying? Should they change their subjects or choose specific subjects with the advent of AI?
AI is certainly reshaping education, from personalized learning experiences to automating administrative tasks. Students should focus on acquiring skills that AI can't easily replicate, like critical thinking, creativity, and emotional intelligence. Studying subjects that integrate AI, like data science or machine learning, can also be beneficial, along with courses emphasizing ethics and technology. What do you think?
That sounds good. What about with a specific Vietnam context?
In Vietnam, integrating AI into education could help address local challenges like large class sizes and resource limitations. Students should consider subjects that combine AI with local industries like agriculture, manufacturing, and healthcare. Courses that focus on AI applications in these areas could be particularly valuable. Additionally, fostering an understanding of how AI can support sustainable development and address societal needs will be key.
Can you ask it for the IB context?
What about with a context of IB?
In the International Baccalaureate IB context, AI's influence highlights the importance of interdisciplinary learning. Students should focus on subjects that blend AI with global issues, like environmental science, economics, and ethics. The IB's emphasis on critical thinking, inquiry-based learning, and global perspectives aligns well with preparing students for an AI-driven world. Engaging with technology while understanding its societal impact will be key in their studies.
One of the things that I've actually recommended some of my students to do is to use the voice mode AI just like that to help them study, because you can have a conversation. You can go backwards and forwards and you can say, I don't understand, go again. And it will repeat it. Or you can change the conversation round and it'll remember your points. So if you've been struggling and then you come back to it later, it'll remember. I've got one big warning though. Large language models, AI at the moment, is very agreeable. It always says yes. That's a good idea. What an interesting point. It is not good at correcting you. If you say something wrong, it'll try and be nice to you. That's an interesting perspective. Have you considered this? But it won't say, no, you're wrong, do it like this. It can be very, very dangerous to rely on it because it is going to agree with what is being said to it. I mentioned some stories earlier. There was a car company in Canada that set up ChatGPT as the customer service response. And what happened was somebody was chatting to it and they convinced ChatGPT to promise to buy them a new car. Because you can just talk to it. And then they sued the car company and they said, yes, you need to promise it because you've said that the customer support was an official representative of your company and it has made a promise. You can't just pretend that it doesn't exist. This is a really interesting concept. So, some real dangers. Anyway, sorry, I kept talking.
I think that kind of emphasizes, or at least to me, why still being good academically and having all of those skills that we value in our traditional approach to education is still really important. We need to be able to highlight or distinguish or notice, sometimes when there's errors, and we need to be able to make those decisions on a higher level. It's a bit like the question that you have of why don't we just Google things? Google's there. Why do we need to go to school in the first place? But it's because you need to have a certain amount of skills or knowledge in order to identify risks or dangers in just totally relying on just one approach.
100%. And it's also not a search engine. You should not be relying on it to give you factual information. I've got a colleague, he teaches in publishing. And he'd ask ChatGPT, can you give me a list of 5 authors who died in 1953 because they were running out of copyright? This was last year, and it gave them a list of authors, none of which who died in 1953. It was just people who died around that time because it was based on the context. It's not a search engine. It's based on what is everybody else talking about with context clues. So it's great for theories, it's great for testing analogies, for explaining concepts, for coming up with different examples. That sort of stuff's wonderful, but you shouldn't be relying on it, at least not yet.
Yeah, perfect. I think we had a student wanting to ask a question just from near the back. Do you want to ask?
Yeah, I just had a question. Are there risks of AI, like of students over-relying on AI to do like academic tasks like essays or assignments?
100%. It is something that we are really considering at the moment. What does it mean to actually learn? And what is the point of a student being there? We want students to think and understand. I have challenges with, I give students a task, and the very first thing they do is they copy it, they paste it into ChatGPT and say, can you write me code that does this? And ChatGPT will give them code that does it. But the process of figuring things out is essential. And here's the other bit that's actually essential. The process of failing is essential in order to learn. It is only when you struggle, it's only when something doesn't work and then you keep working at it till it does work, do you actually grow as a human being. We used to joke that computer science is the art of banging your head against a wall until suddenly it just works. Because it is. It's constantly fixing bugs, and why doesn't it work? What does that error mean? Oh, I missed a semicolon or a bracket. Something silly. But then suddenly it just works and you feel amazing. Yes, I achieved that, it was successful. But it's by overcoming that challenge that you get that success. It's only by learning, by doing it yourself, do you actually grow. And it comes back to the question earlier about, the point earlier about qualifications. If all you are capable of doing is copying and putting it into ChatGPT, why is anybody going to hire you? Why is anybody going to trust you to do anything when they could just copy and paste it themselves? Really, we need students to remember the point of school, the point of university, is to learn. It's not about getting through it, it's about becoming more knowledgeable and learning how to achieve things. I would say it's even wrong to say that we should just blanket ban it. Because the thing is, it does allow us to focus on creative tasks. It allows us to focus on the important things, which is achieving our goals and not doing the boring drudgery bits. The filling in the explanation for it, the stuff that you've done 100 times before. I use it all the time for creating what we call boilerplate code. It's code that we've done 1,000 times before, but we need to put it there to get everything else working. Well, why am I doing that? If I click a button and it's done, I can focus on the interesting part of the question. The challenge as a student is you don't always know what the interesting part of the question is. It's only as you start really understanding the content and the material do you learn the difference between what is the interesting bit and what's the boilerplate, what's the boring parts.
Good. Toma, did you want to ask your question?
It's a wonderful question. I actually taught an entire 2-hour lecture the other day on AI in popular culture, and especially around this idea that AI is going to become sentient and overthrow us and attack us. We don't know. But the honest answer is currently we are nowhere in line to be approaching what we call strong AI or AGI, artificial general intelligence, the idea of sentience. Mainly because we don't even know what sentience is. What does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to have wants and needs? And it's back to the philosophy questions here. We can't even emulate what we do, so how are we meant to create something new? So it's very unlikely, at least in the next 10 years, but I don't know Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI, the guy who creates ChatGPT. He says there's big announcements next year about AGI, but he also says a lot of things. So we will see next year if there is actually coming out of it.
Yeah, great stuff. Something quite tangible for these students, hopefully. In the run-up to their mocks, which is in January, so after Christmas, as well as in March for their second mocks, and then the final exams, the IGCSEs, starting as early as April through to June. How would you recommend some of our students, or many of our students, revising with the use of AI? What would be an effective way to do it?
So the thing that AI is fantastic at is discussing concepts, especially about putting concepts in new context and approaching it from new angles. If you've got a teacher that's been telling you something, you've been explaining it, but it's just not clicking, they haven't explained it in a way that suits you, because everybody's different in how they learn. It's fantastic for asking it that. Can you explain some of the cultural history here in a different way?
Yeah, and actually, just to pick up on that, we are planning to launch the IB fairly soon for the next academic year as a sixth form, and myself as a teacher from the UK, that's something that I'm adjusting to. I've taught A-level, of course, but this is a different international context, and so for me, similar to what you've just suggested, I'm kind of going down that approach of seeing how my current specialist knowledge fits in with the international context and where the gaps might be or how I need to adjust. So, I mean, I think the students will appreciate or find it interesting that even teachers use AI to brush up on their subject knowledge or to think about what are the best ways to teach certain aspects in maths and coming in from different angles, different perspectives to suit different learners. So that's something that I think you guys would find interesting, maybe. Yeah.
Let me quickly talk about some of the more interesting non-academic uses of AI that you can also use, because it also ties in some really nice examples, because this is built on a series of other expectations. Sometimes, even if you're dealing with personal challenges and you want an outside perspective, ChatGPT is wonderful at being somebody who is non-judgmental, who is able to listen to what you're saying and give feedback. Don't trust it. It's very agreeable, but sometimes just talking about challenges and problems is incredibly beneficial. And it's a great way of pushing it through. It's also great at removing emotion from things. I was in the past, I was dealing with a very challenging colleague, and whenever I emailed them, I used to get very frustrated at them. And I found myself saying, I found it so difficult to write professional emails. So what I ended up doing at one point was I'd write my email, I'd feed it into ChatGPT, and I'd said, can you make this sound more professional? Can you remove some of the vitriol and anger from this email? And it did. I would have done it myself, but it's difficult sometimes to remove that emotion because you're in the context. So having something completely external is also really helpful. It's also great at looking at complex scenarios and situations and just giving advice. So it's wonderful, but it doesn't remove any. You've got to remember, it doesn't understand anything. There's no knowledge there, there's no understanding. You need to rely on external sources as well. Friends and families know a lot more about your life than ChatGPT does. So don't over-rely on it. And also, please don't rely on it for that social connection. There's some really interesting studies going on at the moment about people using AI friends because they're looking for those connections, and it's difficult to make friends. The problem is that's not healthy in the nicest possible way. It's not a great way because we're dealing with, you live in human culture, you need to work with other humans. So great, don't rely on it.
Okay, and just picking up on that, are there any prompts or questions that we should be asking ourselves when we use AI so that we don't go too far with it, whether that's in an academic sense or, as you've mentioned, almost a psychological response? So we could start with the academic if that's easier to narrow down.
Well, no, I think in general, a lot of this stuff is still incredibly new. I've mainly been sticking on large language models on ChatGPT because that's the one that has the most access to recently, and it's the one that's most accessible to non-experts. But it's only been around properly for 2 years since really, and there hasn't been any real research or understanding about the impact of it because it's changing everything so very quickly. So there's not any official experience guidelines. We don't know. My personal view is to really just make sure you're considering everything and stopping and thinking about what your actions mean. And a lot of this ties back into the effective use of AI anyway. What are the goals and objectives? What are the things that we are trying to achieve and why? And how can we use that effectively? If you stop and ask, why am I asking AI this question? What's the benefit of asking AI this question? It's also going to make you think about what you're trying to achieve. So unfortunately my answer is you just need to stop and think about what you do before you do it.
Yeah, and to contextualize that, if you're planning in a math-specific context, if you're planning to just take a photo and submit it, to answer that question, why am I doing it? Is it because I just need to make sure that I get this homework done by Friday morning so that I don't have an infringement and so on? But the more important question should be, what do I need to do to actually be able to learn this content, so that not only can I, complete this homework on time, but longer term, how can I do well in my exams and my future careers and so on? So that's something that you guys should keep in mind.
Computing has changed. We used to have a problem which we used to call was the YouTube cycle, which is where people would watch tutorials of how to write code on YouTube. And they'd watch a tutorial, and then the person would say, great, I know how to do this, I'm an expert. And then they watch another YouTube video, and they'd learn how to do that, and like, oh yes, I know all about this, a crazy advanced concept. And then you would put them in front of a screen and say, write something, and they wouldn't know where to start. A lot of learning is also muscle memory. It's about taking that context and actually trying to apply it. Because it's only when you try and apply it yourself do you discover some of the pitfalls. Because AI and tutorials will often have solved those problems, or they'll ignore the problems because they've done it a specific way. And if you haven't understood it, you'll get stuck in it. So even if you do use AI to solve a question for you, and you say, oh yeah, I understand what it's like, you still need to try it yourself, because you might have missed something and you haven't realized it.
Perfect. We are coming towards the end of this session, so I just want to open it up again. Does anyone have any questions for Fraser, or perhaps for ChatGPT again?
Do you think we'll ever be able to like truly prevent people from abusing AI?
No. I think the genie is out of the bottle when it comes to AI. There's a big push at the moment for regulations in AI. In the US especially, they're saying we need to regulate AI. The reason they're saying that is actually to stifle competition. It's to stop new people inventing AI, or to catch up with the big players. It's not actually to put rules and regulations in place. Especially regulations and rules when it comes to computer science has always trailed behind the technology. Because how can you legislate something if it doesn't exist? You don't know what the laws are. You can't write a law unless you know what people are going to do with it, and you don't know what they're going to do with it until they write it. And it happens so quickly. So when it comes to the legal aspects, it's very, very difficult to actually legislate it. When it comes to the ethics of individuals using it, we're very much back to Sasha's point. We are hardwired to choose the easiest option. So, of course, there's always somebody that's going to try and seek an advantage. But just because somebody else is trying to use it unethically, just to try and get through a system, doesn't mean that everybody else should too. We're into some really interesting pedagogical and cultural questions here about what does it mean to succeed, and how do we get ahead of our competition. And it's really a moral question at some point about, well, who do you want to be as a person? Do you want to be somebody who uses AI to cheat, to get ahead, or do you want to be somebody who you are proud to be as a moral, ethical human being? So good question. Unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for it.
When I use it for like revising or like even learning stuff, like on my own, and then I use it for like explaining me things. Like we all know how smart it is, but is there any chance of getting like wrong answer from ChatGPT?
1000%. This is a concept called a hallucination. What it means is that ChatGPT, or the large language model, has just made something up. It does it all the time because that's how it works. It tries to predict what the next word should be. So based on the context, what's the next word that should go on? Well, based on my 16 billion other examples, it should be this word. But it doesn't actually know that. There used to be there was a very famous prompt that went around about 5 months ago, where you asked ChatGPT how many N's are in the word banana, and ChatGPT would say 2, and it was just wrong. And you said, count it for me, spell it out letter by letter, and it'd spell it out. How many N's? 2. It just didn't understand the context. It can't count it. I already gave the example about give me a list of 3 people who died in 1953, random people who died around that time. It's not a search engine, it's just a guessing estimate. But especially when it comes to broad concepts, when it comes to theories, it's very good. Because when you're talking about concepts and theories, there's lots of examples that are correct, and it will draw from those, not from very specific edge cases. Generally, the more specific you get, the worse it performs.
Got it. Thanks for letting me know.
Okay.
Phil,
What would-
I'm ready.
what
Looks
would-
like it seems that the transcript didn't come through fully. Could you please repeat your question?
What would Marcus Aurelius think about artificial intelligence?
Marcus Aurelius, as a Stoic philosopher, might view AI as a tool that could be used for good or ill, depending on how humans wield it. He'd likely emphasize the importance of wisdom, virtue, and ethical considerations in its development and use. Ultimately, he might see AI as an opportunity for humans to cultivate inner virtues by thoughtfully navigating its challenges.
Not bad at all.
So this was the transcript here. So this one is, when I'm having the voice chat, it's literally just listening to me, and then it comes out and puts it in. It's doing nothing else apart from taking on my conversation as well, so I can type a bit. You can see it got a little bit messed up when it was coming backwards and forwards. If you type it, you don't get that mess up, but it still causes some challenges. I know we're finishing. I'm sorry. I'll talk for 2 seconds and I promise I'll stop. The crazy thing that we're seeing, the big change that's happening with AI that's going to be a massive impact on it in the next 6 months. 2 things. One is the inclusion of outside searches and tools. In the first days of ChatGPT, it purely based it entirely from its own understanding and its own database. Now, with the more advanced versions of ChatGPT, it's also searching the web. In the old days, it wouldn't give you sources. Now it can. It'll give you links directly to where it's got information from, which is really exciting. It's suddenly it builds its own search queries based on the conversation that you're having. The other thing that we're seeing that's changing on is this idea of multiple agents. What happens is ChatGPT, when you ask it a question, actually starts 5 different conversations with itself. And it bounces ideas off the 5 different points until it comes back together in one answer. So what it means is, say I asked it to develop a solution for some code, the first thing it would do is ask a separate ChatGPT that we don't see, define what the goals and the objectives are. And then the first one says, great, here are the goals and objectives. And then ChatGPT would pass that to a different conversation and say, based on these goals and objectives, what should I be using, or what languages or what tools? And it creates this own separate roles where it's taking on different responsibilities within itself. So it's reaching a point, and the AI is developing, so that ChatGPT has started improving the questions that we ask it. It used to be that it was all based on what prompt you gave it. Well, now ChatGPT is also starting to compensate for our bad prompts and try and improve the prompt before it gives you an answer. It also has a problem, however, that it might add in additional hallucinations. If it has misunderstood what we're saying, it might go further off on a tangent. But it's really interesting. Cool, I think I've talked plenty, but I will be about after the sessions today. If anybody does want to talk to me more, I'm more than happy to talk. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Fraser.